Okay, well, welcome. I'm Terry Johnson. I'm here from the Education Department with two of my colleagues, Kate Bohn-Gettler and Jeanne Cofell. And I think that you are here for the fifth of 5 presentations in the Charlottesville series. I have 2 things written on my hand. Every single time I go to talk about Charlottesville, I call it Charleston. So at some point when I'm speaking today, I'll probably say that. And then I also wanted to mention that these events were organized and sponsored by the Intercultural Directions Council. The problem is I wrote it on here this morning and I've since washed my hands. We are very pleased, honored to be here today to engage you in some conversation in closure, as a closure to the sessions that have already occurred. How many of you attended one of the other sessions? Okay, so our session is quite a bit different in terms of its structure and its content. The first 4 sessions focused on really compelling, disturbing, disappointing issues that have arisen as part of the Charlottesville issue, or it's gotten more they've gotten more attention. Each of those sessions focused primarily on experts providing you with information. So we were charged with bringing this whole series to closure and figuring out, all right, so what do we do to take care of all of these issues? And you can imagine that that task was not as easy as we might have expected, because honestly, if it was easy, someone would have done it a long time ago, right? So we have 75 minutes to grapple with the issue, where do we go from here? So during our session, there's going to be a fair amount of discussion, small groups, individual reflection, and then we'll come back together in the whole group. Is there something else I was going to say? So, Jeanne Cofell is going to begin with some opening remarks.
Okay, so today we're looking at envisioning country and campus anew, moving forward with hope, courage, and compassion, creating connections through conversation. So first of all, I wanted to publicly thank all of the presenters and the organizers for this series. I think it's been really valuable. I also want to thank all of you for coming here to be part of this conversation today. So our session is to attempt to do the work of envisioning and moving forward with hope and courage and compassion in light of the hard realities of what we have looked at in this series. I know for me, and perhaps for many of us, as I was attending events in this series, I kept thinking back to historical atrocities, such as the enslavement of African peoples, or the mass murder of the Jewish people during the Holocaust. So we fought wars against this kind of evil oppression, and still the past haunts us in the realities of today. During World War II, my father was stationed in India, where he saw almost indescribable poverty and suffering. And in 1945, when the war had ended and he was waiting for orders to return to the United States, when he would finally be able to go home after 2.5 years away from his family overseas. And while he was waiting, on October 12th of that year, 1945, he wrote a letter home to his parents. And I'd like to just read a few lines from that letter if I could. When one looks at the oppressed millions here in India, America shines like a new star in the firmament of nations. However, we still have much to do to make America a fine place to live. We kept ourselves free from those who would oppress us externally. That's one reason we fought a war. We still have to fight against those who would oppress us internally, those who look on people as masses instead of people. So here we are 72 years later. working against the forces that would oppress us internally. Many of the issues that were brought up in the Charlottesville series. So to look at what oppresses us internally within our country or within our campus requires looking at realities in our own communities. For example, the high rates of poverty, domestic violence, sexual abuse, sexual assault. In education, we have to look at such issues such as the school-to-prison pipeline, which is a disturbing trend that uses disciplinary policies that result in higher rates of incarceration, which disproportionately affect students of color and students with disabilities. We also have to think about the achievement gap, which for people in education who study the achievement gap in a sociocultural context understand to be an opportunity gap. That is that people in poverty and people of color consistently do not have equitable access to opportunities that affect learning and flourishing. So as we think and work against those forces that would oppress us internally, we think about creating a kind of society that would eliminate or decrease these kinds of harms and injustices. So as we thought about moving forward, we decided to think about the beloved community, which Dr. Johnson will talk more about in a bit. But the term beloved community was first used in the early 1900s by a philosopher theologian named Josiah Royce, who also founded the Fellowship for Reconciliation. Dr. King began using the phrase the beloved community as early as 1956, and his use popularized the term. So I want to emphasize that for King, the beloved community was not a romantic, utopian, pie-in-the-sky idea. Rather, it is a realistic, achievable goal that can be attained if we are committed and trained toward that goal. As I was thinking about the beloved community, I was making a connection to a term in healthcare called primary prevention. Primary prevention is essentially aimed at preventing harm and disease before it occurs. So what are the attainable goals that we can set and work toward the creation of the conditions for a world in which we prevent harm and oppression? So today, as we go through an envisioning process, I hope you'll be able to tap into your own experiences to build a vision that elevates that humans are capable of growth and love. One of my mentors once told me that we need a vision, but we have to have our feet on the ground of reality. And the Judaic tradition says that a people without a vision will die. A vision helps us move forward as best we can. Hopefully, a vision that affirms that dehumanization is not the destiny of humankind. We need to believe that there is a very good reason for hope. Do we have an answer? I wish we did, but we don't. We have one way of thinking about this. Obviously, complex problems require complex solutions. But here we are on a Catholic Benedictine campus that I believe can offer some tools for growing a vision, tools for hope, and tools for wisdom for how to think about moving forward. Thomas Merton, a Catholic social justice mystic, asks us, can we speak words of hope? And he says, shall this be the substance of your message, to be human in this most inhumane of ages? So we begin with the suggestion that yes, the Benedictine value of human dignity informs a vision of what can be, the remarkable reality that of every human person as someone with dignity and the need to be loved and the capability to love. We are not born hating. As Stephen Post, a professor of preventive medicine out of Stony Brook, says, people who are loved, love people. People who are hurt, hurt people. And he says this all is set in motion in the early years. This helps us understand what Gandhi may have meant when he said that even the discriminator is a wounded being. That is not, of course, to excuse hurtful or hateful actions. We are all responsible for our actions. But the three of us from the Education Department believe that the work of rehumanization is the great task of education. That is to move love forward. We are born with the need to be loved, and we are born with the capacity to love. Timothy Jackson, Senior Fellow at the Center for the Study of Law and Religion at Emory, advocates that the first human rights are the right to be loved and the right to be taught to love. Benedict and Vision suggest that the core of every movement forward must realize and recognize the dignity of every human person. And we suggest that compassion and conversation are tools that can help us begin to move toward a vision that humans are capable of love and move us toward a love that can be in this complex time and complicated world.
All right, so we met multiple times in preparation for our meeting today, and we worked through multiple iterations of possible directions to go during our session. And ultimately, what really seemed to stick for us and resonate was the concept of beloved community. And Dr. Cofell mentioned Martin Luther King and his work and his comments and speaking on the beloved community. And so we are today going to use that notion, that concept, as sort of our goal, and think more about first, what is the beloved community, and then think about what would a beloved community on our two campuses look like. Before we get to the latter part though, we want you to think a little bit about what do you think the defining characteristics of a beloved community are. So on your table, you have envelopes, 2 or 3 envelopes, because we're thinking that you can share, with quotes. And there are 10 quotes in here. And each of them includes a statement by a central thinker from the past, from the present, that touches on the concept of beloved community. So we would like you to think about these quotes and then jot down on the paper as you're going along, what do you think are these key characteristics that define this concept? You might also draw on those times in your lives that were especially positive, wonderful experiences, and think about what was it about those experiences that made them so wonderful. But the quotes should definitely form at least part of what you're thinking about here. So you have about 4 minutes to go through the quotes and jot down some ideas. Mm-hmm. Okay. to the people at your table. In the education department, we really value that.
These ones sound to me. I don't know if they necessarily be able to use more, so I thought this was like short. Right, I don't know. I just thought. That stood out to you. Oh, that was this one, yeah.
It's really short. I think just do a lot of it talk and not a lot of action. I look out, so in a beloved community, the members are actively engaged.
It's kind of like the more people that come together, the more you can do, rather than everyone being up in their own little celebration. And you're obviously going to accomplish much like little different things as a whole. Like you're not going to be able to accomplish a bigger object. Maybe. Yeah. Yeah.
Lynn, does your table, your groups have a
So like when I see this, like, I don't know, I just like stand out with it because I'm like, oh my gosh, like I see Dream of Justice, Develop Reserve, like I don't know, but I think they can. It's such a lot of short stuff, but I feel like this is really good. Yeah. I didn't really understand this one that much. I mean, I think that it's like implied that like two action. More set of events.
I think that's how.
You know who makes that? I don't know.
It's all.
What is this supposed to be?
For sure.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Crazy people. So what do you think?
It's a broken down city.
Alright, what are some examples of defining characteristics that you came up with? So if somebody said to you, oh, this is my beloved community, what is something that you would think, okay, that must be present?
We wrote down different perspectives.
Different perspectives. Okay. What else?
Going along with that, the affirmation about differences is good. You don't want all to be the same.
Exactly. So there's that dual nature of, there's lots of diverse perspectives in the world right now, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that we're all listening to each other's perspectives or trying to understand each other's perspectives, but putting these two ideas together, diverse perspectives, and then recognizing and acknowledging the diversity and the value of that diversity is really important. What else?
Support and love for the members in your developed community?
Absolutely. So members who really care about each other. The common good. It's not just about what's best for me. And I'm a social studies education person, and so, one of the things that makes the study of social studies really interesting to me is that we see a lot of situations in which my individual rights conflict with what's good for the community. And so in a beloved community, we would see the raising of common good over my rights just as an individual. What else?
I think with a lot of these things, the word we talked about action or being active, none of these things are passive.
Right.
Like, you can't just sit by and think them, you have to act on them.
Absolutely. 2 more.
One of the things that I like, and when you said beloved community, I like those words, and right away I started breaking the words apart,
Yeah.
and that we love community, we love it. And to me, that just stuck out as powerful of, we've got to be the love in the community. And that's not easy. I mean, that's not like a passive,
No, it's
What
always
is love?
easier when we're around people who think like us. And, so absolutely, that's really, it's hard work for sure. One more.
Redemption,
What do you mean by that?
just kind of like overcoming the things from the past that before oppressed us.
Yeah, so there's always room for moving forward, right? I mean, certainly we can't forget what happened in the past, but we can't remain only in the past. So we have to allow ourselves as people to continually move forward.
There was one more hand
Oh,
up here.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I just had this phrase in my mind. When there is no wheel, limits and constraints between the lover and the loved ones.
When there's no,
No wheel, no constraint, and no limits.
absolutely, between the lover and the loved ones, they're united.
Message of inclusiveness,
Mm-hmm.
tolerance, and compassion.
That's lovely. Inclusiveness, tolerance, compassion. And so when I did some reading on the beloved community and thought about these quotes, some of the big ideas, the defining characteristics that came to mind for me are included on the slide up here. And I think we touched on most of these. Privileging the group over the individual, focusing on the potential of communities. We can all look at the communities that we're part of and see things that we would like changed. And we can sort of get bogged down in focusing on everything that's wrong with any given community. If we're members of a beloved community, the goal is not to pretend that those issues aren't there, but the goal is to think in terms of potential. What could we be? Who could we be? So that second one resonates with me. It's achievable. Jeanne mentioned in her opening comments that we're not looking for something here that is utopian in nature. We're looking for changes and the creation of communities that are achievable. And so in my mind, beloved community is a continuum, right? Where we're never all the way there. There's always additional work that we can do to be better individually and be better together, which brings us to the second to the bottom one, where it's not just a focus on changing what's around us, it's also a focus on changing our own hearts and our own ways of being in the world. Let's see, it values learning, it's intentional, as some of you mentioned action, so again, that kind of ties to intentional. We make changes intentionally. It's not like we just kind of sit back and wait for this community to come to us. It requires a lot of work. All right, next slide. All right, so you've seen these two places before, the campuses of St. Ben's and St. John's. For many of us, these are very, very special places, and for many of us, they are what we would consider our beloved communities, or we are part of beloved communities within the larger campus environment. So for example, in the education department, I consider that
one of the beloved communities to which I belong. Everybody in our department worries or thinks about each other, helps each other, supports, listens, and so on. And when we hit a snag, we work through it together. But I think if we think about our community, we can see areas where there is potential for growth. And sometimes when we talk about making change, like we can leave here today and we can do something different and we've made a change. Oftentimes, however, change takes more time. And for me, at least, that can be very challenging. So I want you to think for a moment about the year 2037. Okay, I know. If you're 18 right now, you're like, are you even kidding me? You know, that's more than twice my age. If you're my age, you're thinking 20 years, that's nothing. And so in 20 years, you are going to come back to CSB SJU, and your vision of beloved community will have become a reality on these campuses. So I want you individually to think for a moment or two about what do you see, what do you feel, what do you hear when you visit your beloved community of St. Ben's, St. John's in 2037. So we're focusing on our campus as a context for change because, again, we have 75 minutes, right? The issues that you looked at in previous sessions were national, global in scope, so we really have had to focus in to make it manageable for the time. So what would you see, feel, hear in 2037 if St. Ben, St. John's was your beloved community? And it could be things you already see, hear, and feel. So you can jot some things down individually, you can just think about it, whatever works best for you. All right, now I want you to think for a moment about what changes would need to happen between now and 2037 for your vision of a beloved community to become a reality. So we're talking here, we're thinking about social justice changes. We're not thinking in terms of, you know, there'll be another rec center or there'll be another, I mean, I suppose I shouldn't dictate your beloved community dreams, but I'm not the boss of your beloved communities. But in general, we're thinking in terms of what would it take to create that type of community that you read about in those quotes. And specifically then, write down a couple of specific goals that you would have in order to make those challenges, to address those, or to make those changes a reality. I was going to try to give an example. Yeah. So.
Sure. So one example might be that that all students, faculty, staff on our campus would feel safe in terms of not worrying about being harassed or experiencing sexual assault. So that might be something in 20 years we come back and all students, all faculty, all staff on our campus feel like they're in a safe environment.
So that would be the change, and is the goal the same?
Yeah. Yeah.
The goal would be, so the change and the goal could be the same.
The goal would be no sexual assault, no sexual harassment.
Very timely with the Me Too campaign happening in social media. All right. Do you have any questions about what you're doing? So do it individually for a minute, and then we're going to have you talk at your tables.
All right, for the next 3 minutes, why don't you talk at your table about your vision of beloved community and the social justice goals that you would want to work toward if that vision were to become a reality.
To make it honest, I'm kind of realizing that there are hours because I have no about education. So I'm interested to hear. It's kind of be about goals. Across all.
So that they can see themselves
It's like not an issue that's what is studying and saying that what are we going that they,
You must. You do illustrate a good problem. You guys do.
Did it work?
We already said dinner.
Oh, how so?
You don't have to worry about what you wear, what you say. Everyone's all.
It's funny how that's like considered a virtue.
Seeing everyone's
Proud of talking about politics.
just like taking about the professionals that are which I didn't know.
That's the hard part. Yeah, I think maybe have like more resources for that, because I know there's a lot of that like how your parents raise you and when it comes to like being judgmental by diversity. So I think like we do a really good job about having a much.
All right, I'm going to stop you. I think it could probably go on a little bit longer. Who has a goal, social justice goal, change that they would like to see accomplished?
Being more diverse, like having a more diverse community, and then like accepting all the cultural differences and embracing them.
Okay, increased diversity and acceptance of that, of everything that comes with increased diversity. Okay, other ideas?
I like the idea that rehumanization is to kind of return with that intention of the right to be loved and to again, taught how to be loved and to see that more intentional in what we do in everyday practices.
Sure. One more. No more?
We talked about, our group talked about just the equal opportunity for all students, that we're seeing kind of like a bifurcated experience of students from different socioeconomic backgrounds, and that students from higher socioeconomic backgrounds are able to participate at higher rates in high impact practices. And in 20 years, we'd like to see all students have equal opportunity to any educational endeavor that we offer at these institutions. And then in order to do that, we're going to have to work on affordability of our programs and services, and we're going to have to work on fundraising and scholarships for students.
Okay, so in this group over here, they were starting to think about, all right, well, the first thing we're going to need to do to make this happen. And Mary's starting to talk a little tiny bit about here, well, but those are goals and they're also like action steps with fundraising and whatnot. So our next step now is to move from sort of what our dreams and our goals are here to some thinking about steps that you might take. And Dr. Cofell is going to lead you through that.
Okay, so if we think about what we just discussed as some of the goals, as determined in your groups. For our next step, we decided to use a framework out of several models for setting goals and objectives. For example, in education, we have something called backward design, or there's the ecological model of social change, which is sometimes used, I understand, in social work, health, and sometimes specific areas such as violence prevention. But since one of the central values of our mission here at our colleges is the recognition of the dignity of the human person as central to all action, we decided to turn to Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. King's philosophy of fostering an inner transformation toward a strength to love was actually the template for his principles and his practices of engaging in social change. So his model, the 6 steps of nonviolent social change, can be a framework as we think about this whole series and as we think about working with specific goals as determined at your tables. So Dr. King, as many of you might know, studied Gandhi. And Gandhi had 2 ideas that might be relevant for us today as we think about envisioning and moving forward. The first idea of Gandhi's is that the means we use to achieve social change is what we will end up with. So that is that violence begets violence, or to put it in Dr. King's terms, that love moves us toward the beloved community. So again, the means we use will be what we end up with. The second idea from Gandhi, which is very related, is that the means we use is what we become. So that is to say, our own actions transform us toward who we become, or if I was going to put that individually, my actions transform me to who I become. So if we accept Gandhi's premise, it might suggest that our actions not only have the possibility to affect others, but that we ourselves are changed by what we do. Both Gandhi and King suggested that whether we choose to transform toward love or toward violence is an individual choice. Dr. King quoted historian and philosopher Arnold Toynbee, who said, "Love is the ultimate force that makes for the saving choice of life and good against the damning choice of death and evil. Therefore, the first hope in our inventory should be that love should have the last word." So if I could draw your attention to the handout on the tables, which provides King's 6 steps toward nonviolent change. On one side of the handout, you'll see the principles of nonviolence, which I'm going to let you read that later on your own, but I wanted you to have that. For now, let's look at the 6 steps. And I'll mention that these steps are all premised and built on the principles on the other side, such as, for example, that we should seek to build friendship and understanding. So one cautionary note, Whitney Court said last week in the fake news event that the increasing polarization that we're seeing in the public arenas creates the conditions for seeing others as threats, which I think risks setting up people who disagree with us as the enemy, which creates its own problems. So when you see the word the opponent or opposition in these 6 steps, we want to avoid any construction of the opponent as enemy. We want to avoid attaching any hint of dehumanization to that. So as you can see on the handout, step 1 is about gathering the vital and necessary information from all sides of an issue. In light of the fake news and echo chambers, we really begin to understand what a challenging task that has become. So if you haven't been able to attend that session, I highly recommend going onto the digital commons and watching, well, actually any of the sessions. Step 2, education, stresses the importance of educating others, including the opposition. So in our Charlottesville series, for example, we thought about education and monuments, which was part of the previous session on public memory. Step 3 stresses the need for personal reflection, examining hidden motives and biases, which was also part of the fake news session. Step 4, discussion and negotiation, puts forward an approach to communicate honestly and at the same time calling forth the good in others. In the first session in Charlottesville series, they talked about free speech versus hate speech, and they discussed the concern that discourse is dying while free speech thrives. And so perhaps the approaches suggested in step 4 could help to elevate discourse. Step 5, direct action, is a step that's taken when the opponent is unwilling to enter into or to remain in discussion and negotiation. And for Dr. King, step 5, the essential aim was to really, of direct action was to apply moral pressure to resolve injustice. Step 6, reconciliation, has perhaps been a little bit less addressed in the series, but as you can see here in your handout that it specifies to win friendship and understanding and to work against evil systems. So we're going to use these 6 steps now as a guide for moving forward with the focus topics, or at least 1 or 2 of them that you identified at your tables. So instead of thinking of steps 1 through 6 in kind of a linear way, you might begin to think of them as steps in a cycle of a campaign, each step embodying activities that are related to the other 5 elements. So try to use it really as a framework for attainable goals and actions, because remember, we have to believe that the beloved community is attainable. So let's see, I want to go to the next slide here. Together, using your goals, determine attainable sub-goals in 1 or more of the 6 steps as outlined by Gandhi's 6 steps, Martin Luther King's 6 steps. You may want to begin with information gathering and education, but kind of depending on where you are in your own process, you could conceivably start with any step. So to determine some specific goals that you would set for today, this week, this month, this year, before I graduate as an alumni, any of the above. So for example, if your table focused on a goal such as ending sexual assault, and we began with information gathering and or education, we could list one of those goals as, I'm going to contact the Rape Crisis Center and I'm going to find out what educational opportunities they have to offer. That's an attainable goal in a campaign, an attainable goal in a process of working for this change. So there would be others as well. So once you think through some ideas, then we're going to think about what supports we would need for that. But keep some notes on the paper because we'll be kind of debriefing a little bit, and I don't know how long we'll need for this, maybe 5 or 10 minutes. We'll kind of see how it goes.
Start.
And then just
which is one of the things even that's so many students goes very along with that is where do you start kind of self-coaching embodying, and it also speaks to the needs, right? So we are doing things, we are actually going to become the outcomes as well as transform ourselves towards that. So
You're almost graduating.
how we do that, how do we show them that also gives you perspective. Even more. So I agree with you. Even this semester, one of the things I'm figuring out is how we're going to always include like a section in that. So I'm like trying to figure out where we're going to get that in, right? You know, and that should, and really that shouldn't be. You know, that key, so to rethink that, how we going to do that personally more of course.
This is definitely an area that I struggle with, like goal setting in general, because I tend to get super like excited and like ready to change, and like really fast about it, like okay, and then I just it's like downhill. So I think that like personally that's one thing that I definitely have to work on. So I'm looking forward to it.
One of the things I see.
Like with my goal setting and like keeping it up. But I like something that just isn't cooking in my brain to like think about like how I can start
Social,
making changes because I'm so good at something being such a small emotions community. It's like if I make a change, how does that affect other? You know what I mean? I'm trying to get out of that mess.
So that's helpful. And they also know that
How you see experiences as well.
And there was a movement organizing the protest to bring in other voice.
it's very tough.
This is not.
So how does that look for transition?
But if you felt this was just for you, I will come. And I kind of like it's nice, like just like I even offer credit to me. Especially, you know,
These different students.
free speech, figure out how you want to vote. And want to talk to someone more about what can change the
Some people get the same.
several like I've done that. That was just like totally around my eyes. Yeah.
Folks are more like, I want to go with my friends.
What else is this?
It's really interesting. Because they do.
That's this is right. The sustained
Believe in thy value, especially as not the same as what my
So what do we do with
and to me that creates this unbalance that
it's hard to maintain sustained
message
change.
to all
makes it hard to
football players.
those other commitments that yours
In doing some of this work.
Are there specific things other than just what are some things that
We get
participate in a wider variety of activities where they can interact?
So we actually come to some extent. How do you bus?
We're a group of men, the one in particular is just hearing about this language. It's short for Jeanne. Yeah. So many of those are very friendly. And ultimately, it's not an issue.
So what is some of your ideas?
Because the people who are friendly and want to talk to us.
What would you like to?
So it's trying to change the terminology to try to make it more normal for people to engage in this. So instead of saying
I would like
this,
my knowledge to grow. I think that I can not necessarily close-minded, but I knew what I knew and what my family had told me that I. So I think that I would like expand. Like, I don't know, but like, yeah. I think it'd be cool, like coming to these things and like I'm kind of like a step back and like, wow, like it's not that I know nothing, but like I just
Yeah, yes, that's the key.
with nice to see it, like think about it as a whole sense of the family and like the media and all that stuff. So I'd say that's cool. Step one, ideal, yeah.
Not entirely. There were several more cases of more that I heard of, right? Yeah, right, more direct, yeah, and more direct discrimination. So, like,
What are some of the areas in which you might want to lean more knowledge?
saying someone under threat but loud enough for her to hear, or still home. That type of thing.
I feel like I don't really look at who's other,
So we see.
not like other actions, like go to meetings, Jeanne, like in my little experience, that was great, like white, like middle class, you know, like really like see clearly that perspective of teachers and how they
So trying to
So they're like,
so you made Jeanne.
that's what Jeanne was on, because they always
The problem now is
That's not
the other
and Jeanne.
at least in general, sacred and all, still, there is a bias to the family. There is a chance of genocide. Really,
What are some intentions that you think creatively and how you do that as far as kind of getting that things like goals, we can say.
If Jeanne are not separated, if they work out, if they get together and work out, would that be the strongest nation? If they were not.
Tomorrow night.
Yeah, we'll get
Dinner
there.
he wants it to be surprising. He wants to buy someone. He wanted the stage, so he wanted leaders want
I'm sorry.
Why would our guys do something?
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt these wonderful discussions, but I do want to move us on to one more thing to consider. So to answer the question of how to move forward, I think what we're doing now is really important because we're bringing it back to the community. And one of the important things about a community is that it should include particular supports, or it has particular supports to help you as you move forward towards your goals. So now that you've identified some specific goals for social change to create this beloved community here on campus, it's now important for us to consider how you will enact these types of change goals. And as we work to enact changes, understanding where we need support or from where we need support and the significance of being part of that community that works for change is absolutely essential. In short, we are embedded in a community. Our actions influence all levels of the community, just as we are likewise influenced by the community in which we live. So to meaningfully and successfully enact social change, it is essential for us to identify within the varying levels of our community what supports are actually necessary for us to do this work. So to help frame this discussion, please consider the social ecological model, and I have a picture of this up on the screen. This model acknowledges that each of us are embedded in a multi-layer community system. So for instance, you're an individual with knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors. Now you are nested within an interpersonal system of friends, family, and other social networks. And then this is further nested within a community that is then nested within particular organizations and social institutions. And all of this is part of a larger policy and enabling environment that includes national, local, and state laws. Now the point of this model is to recognize that we need supports from multiple levels in order, from our community in our efforts to create this beloved community and to work for social change, and our work will then reverberate along each of these different levels. Now, identifying where we have some supports can enable us to move forward with our goals, and it may even be that one of your goals is to work to build one of these types of supports, because maybe there's a support that's not in place to actually help you achieve that goal. So in fact, now we would like for you to think about what supports you would need to meet your goal on multiple levels. So I put this framework up here to just help you think a little bit about this. So as an example, let's say that one of your attainable goals is thinking about, okay, I need to self-educate myself on the particular topic of sexual assault, the same goal that Dr. Cofell brought up earlier. So this would likely require some interpersonal support such that you have trusted friends, family, and others that you could engage in dialogue as you develop your knowledge and ideas about this. It would also require some organizational support such that you'd have access to libraries, other materials, and other organizations that could help you build that knowledge. You might require some mentorship or resources from faculty on campus or collaboration with various campus offices such as Residential Life. You may also, or even with academic affairs. You may also identify supports from the administration, such as policy revisions, listening or engagement, or from the Benedictine community in terms of thinking about intentions, prayers, programming, and resources. Now, the list I've given you is clearly not at all exhaustive. There are likely many other sources of support that you will think of, but this process of engaging in thinking about what supports you need can help make the goals that you've talked about become more attainable. So please, next at your tables, I would like for you to identify what supports you need to meet your goals. You might consider what supports you already have in place, and then also think about what you might need to build and how you would build those. And if you could, please write those down on the pieces of paper that we've left on your table. We would like to collect some of these at the end so that we can disseminate your thoughts to the appropriate decision-making and implementation sources. So we'll give you about 5 to 7 minutes to work on that before we come back for debriefing and discussion. Does the task make sense?
Since we were talking about the bus, should we talk about the safe, the safe
discussion topics.
Should we say that? People say that. Pushing.
Inner circle?
Yeah.
Like in what did they do in class?
Yeah, I think my family is
Trying to take it. Yeah.
We've gone through a lot together, so when I was growing up here, I think like without them, swearing it's like there's
So when you're thinking of, you both talked about your family being of support to you. Relative to your needs and entire experiences, how do you see your family helping you in this situation?
Here or in here?
I was gonna say, that's what I'm trying to do, is to get operational business put it into the structure, okay, if that's a group that support, are they the best things that can help you It might be to kind of push me to, people or, I guess I'd throw out those.
The teachers here are really, they really get to know the students and are really like available.
You feel there's spiders on this, like, our yeah.
You gotta say
You won't have a before you can say whatever you want.
Your mentors are in, you don't have to worry about it.
Would you feel like how many years old? Would you feel like I mean, if we were to just pick a topic,
Especially like
would you
a
tell us one side of
No,
it would just be 1 year, and then 1 year. I'm here 4 years. Because so many people.
We were surprised. So I think that's one factor.
I wasn't leaving. All except
When they're confronted that, and he uses that, that's different than every
Individually or even having the teachers do more.
And so,
I think that's.
the place that go around. So like the members
You were
that
high for 1 month.
Yeah.
For me, since I am on my own, and always feeling like like I love this, like less words, close connection with everyone. But I think coming to college has just made me realize how hard it is. In the end, like, it's me pushing myself to finish my homework, it's me pushing myself to write this paper ahead of time, it's me, because like nobody, your friends aren't gonna be like, wow, you should write a paper, like your family's not gonna, hey, do you do, maybe you should write that, and like coming into college, like really, like I can just like taste it. Sure, there's always an opportunity, like also like it's up to
Yes.
make a change. Start to make a change. So I think that's what it comes down to for me, just finding my own personal.
I think one of the things that I want to do outside of just really is we're thinking about registering students. So I might push yourself more there. I think that Jeanne is to respond to that. When you're thinking about it, how do I get myself out there? I think about it. This is not be my school. Find a way of writing this. Right. So that's
I think like going to your class, like I honestly coming on here, being in your class, you had us go to so many like that I didn't.
In a moment that I will report out, so just another moment to finish up your current thoughts.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of difficult though, like with the nursing major, is that there are like your classes are just like set up like what you have to do is what you have to do. And I kind of like, I really want to be in nursing, but I also really want to also like explore, like see what else I could like to do. So that's kind of
Okay, given the limited amount of time we have left, again, I hate to stop such productive conversations, but I'm hoping this is a conversation that will continue past this session. We wanted to think a little bit about how are we actually thinking about moving forward, and as a group we thought it would be useful if each table could share the goal and the steps and some of the supports that they would need, and then we could use that to then segue into a closing statement from us and then some discussion and time for questions. So is there a table that would like to start by sharing some of your discussions?
We can start.
All right, thanks, Lynn.
We have the goal to eliminate the tension between the St. Joe Police Department and the students.
And how
We have a whole sheet of ideas. First of all, we thought about gathering the 4 parties, being, actually it's probably 5 parties, the drinkers and the non-drinkers, the administration, the St. Joe Police, and the residents. And our goal is so that everyone has the same information. Like even at this table, we did not know it was a felony to have a fake ID.
Oh, wow.
And how that affects our students in the education department, the nursing department, whatever. You cannot easily get a license with a felony. So just the information gathering, and then just the open communication, so people are willing to listen to each other. And you talked about getting people together, not just emails and announcements, but actual people.
Thank you. We'll get to everybody, you said.
We didn't get very far, but where we did get, we were focusing on feeling safe on the link after what came to light last year, and unfortunately is likely still going on to a certain extent. So working on educating ourselves, especially like if you're not privy to the cases, like Molly was saying, not having as much contact with the students in that regard. And then also like when I hear about the cases, I get flooded with anger and I kind of become immobilized initially, so learning how to deal with that. Talking to the students more and learning about their experiences. And for faculty and staff, like in Molly's role, working on our education, our curriculum, using our resources, counseling services is doing a thing for faculty coming up that just came out today about helping to support students better. And I do a lot of projects in my classes, but now I want to tackle this through a project in my class. So I don't know how I'm going to fit that into my curriculum, but doing things like that.
I'm just going to call on, how about the table in the back?
Sure. I don't think we did a great job sticking with the script, but a lot of what we talked about was just making campus a more welcome place for diverse students. That's kind of a broad overarching goal, but one of the things we talked about is just even with, I think, just having, starting the individual, is just having conversations. Some of the table just kind of talked about how people they live with, we just don't discuss things because the potential of what could happen, and I think we have to be okay with some tension, otherwise nothing's going to happen. It's part of being on a college campus, and that's okay. It goes back to the civility we talked about. Also, a couple students who are exchange students just kind of wanted to, how can we make things more welcoming for students coming here? And this is really kind of outside the comfort zone because we want to make sure they have a great experience. And likewise, if we send Johnny's and Benny's to the countries, we want to see, we hope that their institutions are working to make their experience a positive one. But I can say from the staff perspective, I mean, I think part of what I would say is it can be a long slog of trying to get work done, just like in the real political world. It's a long process, and you mentioned working with a faculty member, different offices, and even if you don't know where to start initially, you got to start somewhere. And I think you just got to start.
Well, I'll take a stab at it on the condition that you all correct me if I get this wrong. So I think the goal that we were working on, was kind of personal growth and knowledge. For sometimes for fairly individual goals, but also towards things like understanding diversity and learning about people outside of our own comfort zones. And then some of the means that we're thinking of to get there are things like, take challenging classes and get faculty to don't just have the same groups, mix them up, meet people who are different than yourself, that sort of thing. You all like to add anything?
We kind of talked about the difficulty with personal growth and how keeping a goal and keeping a positive mindset with that goal, and like how it comes down to you in your inner circle of how you find that at college to push yourself towards achieving your goals and achieving a better knowledge on diversity. here at the campuses?
I'm gonna turn it over to Jeanne. Well, we're kind of getting close to, I don't know what time it is, but we've got a few minutes.
I'll just stand here so we have the little better sound. So before we have just a few minutes, I think, for Q&A, before we close, I wanted to share a few more words with my father that I like to actually start all my classes in the semester with a quote by him. So in all the history of humankind on this earth, there has never been another person like you. Among all the people now living, there is not another person like you. And in the future of human existence, there can never be another person like you. This realization makes you important and unique. It also makes every other person important and unique. No one else can do or be what you can do or be. And if you do not do what you can do, it will not be done.
That's Cofell here.
Yeah, that's my dad.
Oh, this morning
That's
I
him.
said it this
Cofell.
morning.
Yep.
Yeah.
They're his words. I didn't want to, as much as I'd like to take ownership of those words, they're his. So we have a little time for,
Just 1 minute, I think.
oh, is that it? Okay, well.
We can stay later too. We have time for discussion, questions, thoughts.
Or maybe we're already done.
Well, one thing I want to add is that I think this campus is very isolated. You know, kind of 90% white and only about 10% international. So we got to go out there and mix with other people. Because United States, you go to California, is 1/3 white. The rest of them are 1/3 Hispanic and the other third is international. So United States will be mixed. And then you go against China, you know, 100% B. So, and then India, 100% him. So this is the two great nations that you guys have to go compete. But I don't mean to be polarized, but work together.
I disagree on the India part because India, we have 29 states, 29 different people, 1,462 dialects and languages. We don't know 24 official languages. No communication if you don't have English in your mind, maybe. People don't like to speak in Hindi, some parts. They feel that I won't speak in Hindi because I am disrespecting my language, my own cultural language. So I would say India is a lot more diverse than all the countries in the world. I can assure you of this.
I agree with that. China is less than
yes.
that. I understand.
All right, thank you. Step by step, right? Step by step.